He was driven to want to know language and to be able to speak and to be able to understand. During this period of time, he joined the Nation of Islam. He began to listen and speak and talk, and he had such charisma that before he even came out of the prison, he was appointed as a representative. When Malcolm came out of the prison, Malcolm got the opportunity to meet Elijah Muhammad. And when Elijah Muhammad was so impressed by this new follower of his that he made him a minister. Malcolm became one of the most profound ministers of the Nation of Islam. And as a matter of fact, from the time that he got out of prison until 7 years later, Malcolm was the one that established 39 mosques around the United States. They didn't call them, they called them temples at that time. Muhammad's Temple of Islam. It was Muhammad, it was Malcolm that went from town to town and city to city preaching, representing this so-called new faith and establishing temples. Within a span of about 10 years after Malcolm was released from the prison, Malcolm was the national representative of Elijah Muhammad, and at that time they had approximately over 750,000 followers throughout the United States. Now, they were not just people talking. These was new men, new women, who themselves got up in the morning at 5 o'clock. This was the time. He said that, Elijah Muhammad said that a thinking man, an active man, a soldier and a committed man wakes up when the birds get up. That's what he said. He said only lazy people, inactive people, people that will be forgotten and taken advantage of, sleep beyond the time that the sun comes up. That's what Elijah said. So his followers, they got up at 5 o'clock. They didn't pray Fajr, but they were up at 5 o'clock, washing, cutting their nails, brushing their teeth, putting oil on their skin, combing their hair, ironing their shirts and their suits and shining their shoes and getting ready to go out and do what? Sell. He said sell socks, sell pencils, but don't work for anybody other than self. That's what he said. Do for self. Respect self. Others will then do for you and respect you. This was all what Elijah said, consistent with Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said to his companions, he says, out of the 9 portions, out of the 10 portions of halal sustenance for the Bani Adam, the Prophet ﷺ is in what? He says in what? Tijara. Barter and trade. Barter and trade means do for self. Don't work for other people, that Elijah Muhammad said. So he was taking this from whom? He was taken from the Prophet ﷺ. So even though he was mixing stuff up, when you take something from someone, from a legal source, from a legitimate source, even if you mix something up in it, still you're going to find out that you're going to wind up benefiting even from that legal source. Maybe you will nullify its overall benefit because you mix something up with it, but you will inherit the original benefit of it. So these men and women who were before the lowest of the low people became well respected among their families, well respected in their communities. People who went door to door selling fish. Can you imagine? You went to the temple and you got frozen fish. And you had to sell that fish before the end of the day because if you didn't sell it, you had to pay for it. So can you imagine that you got some frozen fish early in the morning? You got to sell it before it thaws out at the end of the day because if it doesn't thaw out, you got to take it home and eat it. Because it's already been paid for. So they were selling fish and fruit and bean pies and newspapers to do what? In order to build their organization, their own commitment, and to be independent. Secondly, they had to go to school. They had to go to the temple and go 4 hours a week for instructions. The men had to go 2 hours a week for martial arts training and for health training. The sisters had to go for MJT training, which means that the Muslim girls training, where they learn to sew and to cook and to be mothers and so forth. So over a period of time, by the year 1968, by the year 1964, Elijah Muhammad's followers were all over the United States of America, and they were claiming that they had close to 2 million followers. I don't believe they ever had 2 million followers, but they were making that claim. And when you saw them, you might imagine that they did have. If you went to their temple, you could eat off the floor. If you went to their restaurants, You could eat off the floor, literally. When you saw them gather for their conferences, you thought they had an army. You would think they were all businessmen and businesswomen. You would think that some new breed of people just came out someplace you couldn't imagine. This was the impact that they had 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Of course, they've lost a great deal of that impact, but I'm trying to give this to you so that you understand the atmosphere in which developed this man. Malcolm, the man, the new man, began preaching and teaching to the degree in which he became the number one, they call it in America, enemy number one on the FBI's list. That means that he was one of the most dangerous men in America according to the FBI. Why? Because he was millions of people away from the government and away from Christianity to the allegiance to Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. At what rate? At a rate of 50,000, 60,000 a year, people were joining. So he was considered very dangerous and provocative because they were saying the white man was a devil. I mean, straightforward. He say, look, you know the white man's a devil, smell him. See how he acts. Look where he come from. He come from a dog. He come from this. He come from that. The American government is just a government of devils. That's how they were talking. Openly. Nobody ever spoke like that. Not 50 years ago. As a matter of fact, they were not devils based upon the definition that Elijah Muhammad gave, but I think as you see, you understand me, some of their actions today, indeed he was correct. They were devils. Devils on the basis we call them, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them, he called them the people of Shaitan, isn't it? The people of Shaitan. Allah mentioned in the Quran in Surah Yasin, he says, O Bani Adam, Allah ta'budu Shaitan, don't follow Shaitan, innahu lakum aduwwun mubin. So the people of the devil are the people that commit evil blatantly. They live according to evil blatantly. They promote immorality blatantly. These are the people of Shaitan. Of course, when we examine what Elijah said, he wasn't accurate for the reasons he said it, but he was accurate in other ways. Malcolm was preaching like this here until one day he met a scholar from Sudan. That scholar from Sudan met Malcolm one day and said, Malcolm, you are a very committed man, a very charismatic man, a very convincing man, a very powerful man, but you have yet to become a Muslim. No one ever said that to Malcolm before. He said, Malcolm, don't take my word for it. I'm just a traveler coming through. But if you really want to know what Islam is, you want to test yourself what kind of man you are, and if you're a real Muslim, go to Mecca. That's a part of the faith, and you accept that's a part of the faith. Go to Mecca, and I'll send you to someone who will help you go to Mecca. He sent him to the Islamic Center at 1 Riverside Drive on 72nd Street in Manhattan. This was in the year 1964, November. Malcolm went there and he met Sheikh Shurabi, who was the director of that center, and I can give you those names because I knew it very well. He went there and he would get an invitation by the Saudi embassy. They gave him an invitation to go to Hajj. Some people helped to raise some of his funds that he could use for his trip because he intended to travel to Africa after. And so his sister and others helped him to raise money, and he went to Hajj. MashaAllah, his letter that he wrote while he was in Arafat, he wrote a letter and said, I am so embarrassed. I thought, here I am, calling myself a minister of the Nation of Islam. And I was so embarrassed that when I arrived in Jeddah, I didn't even know how to wash and pray. He said, I sat in Jeddah, in the pilgrim camp in Jeddah. I sat there for 3 days, so embarrassed. I didn't know how to wash myself, my private parts. I didn't know how to make wudu, ablution. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know the Fatiha. I didn't have a clue about what the Quran really said. I didn't really even know about who the Prophet Muhammad was. And they told me that before I could go to Mecca, I had to go to a court and pronounce my Islam. So here he is thinking he's a minister of Islam, the Nation of Islam, and he had to become, he had to take his shahada in a court in Jeddah. He said,